So while there are a large variety of shows, movies, and games that I plan to talk about on this channel, there are 3 franchises that I like to have as a consistent presence here. One of them is Sonic the Hedgehog, while the other is the Powerpuff Girls. And if you couldn't already tell from my transformation ranking, my reboot debrief, and well, this video, my third is going to be Winx Club. Not only do we have 8 seasons worth of content and even more on the way with the upcoming reboot, but we've also got a lot of spin-offs throughout the franchise's history. Now, my main goal is to make videos dedicated to every single season of the original show in one big retrospective. But I don't want to get into that without tackling the extra content first. Therefore, I'll be doing something of a prologue to my Winx retrospective by reviewing all the currently existing Winx spin-offs that aren't Pop Pixie because it's not really Winx and I don't care for it. Starting off with the one I'm infinitely more positive towards, we've got World of Winx. World of Winx is a very interesting case for me. Coming off the heels of the very unpopular season 7 of the original show, this Netflix original had seemingly swooped in and won back the hearts of all Winx fans near and far. A lot of the praise it received, at least in the beginning, was in contrast to the many criticisms the original show had received in its newer episodes, like the characters, plot lines, and mature themes. Some of the most common sentiments from audiences was that it felt closer in quality to the Winx Club's first 4 seasons. I have a bit of a different assessment though. Even if I still prefer the original show overall, I actually think World of Winx is a lot more structurally competent. Okay, it started out that way, but then it started to feel like it had a bit too much to drink when driving one night, and then it got caught up in a multiple vehicle collision, and then it died in the hospital before it could make a full recovery. Okay, the metaphor kinda got away from me there, but fortunately, I won't have to worry about all of those problems until season 2. For now, we'll be focusing on the highs of season 1. If you're interested in seeing how this 13-episode season managed to surpass the expectations of the original, be sure to stick around. I've got a lot to discuss. Alrighty. If you're new here, this is usually the section where I would detail any significant pieces of background relating to a piece of media during its production stages. However, in a very rare case, I couldn't really find much for World of Winx. The most that I was able to find in my research was some pre-production information. In the years leading up to the show's conception, Rainbow had garnered a very positive relationship with the popular streaming service Netflix, claiming that their distribution program for the original show ended up being a massive success. In 2016, they wanted to capitalize on the large surge in original kids shows that Netflix was experiencing at the time and create a brand new Winx Club show for exclusive broadcasting on the platform. And thus, World of Winx was born. The new show was pitched as its own separate franchise altogether, with a slightly higher age rating than the original, a heavily altered plot involving fairies going undercover to find talents from all over the world, an entirely new setting on Earth devoid of any references to the magic dimension, and even a completely revamped art style that fully adopts the fairy couture that used to only be used in promotional artwork. Honestly, I sort of like to think of this as the Sonic Boom of the Winx Club series, just much more positively received. I mean, it really seemed like this was planned to be a full-on sub-series just as expansive as the original show. They really went all out with it, and probably had a lot of stuff planned. Of course, we all know that it didn't really come to fruition at the end, but hey, this is season 1, so we can forget about that for now. With the actual show, there are 2 distinct differences compared to the original show: the updated art style and surprisingly improved animation. Starting with the art style, well, I've already mentioned how it adopted the fairy couture once used strictly for promotion. That's not the problem here. No, the primary issue is how the art style indirectly led to the whitewashing of Aisha and especially Flora, 2 of the 3 POC characters in the main group who are African and Latine coded respectively. Now, I say indirectly because the art style itself isn't the reason for the whitewashing. On its own, fairy couture is fine as an art style. It's pretty, allows for dynamic scenery, and unlike a certain other redesign sometime in the future, it actually maintains the diverse stylization that we've come to associate with Winx Club. Truth be told, Winx Club has actually had quite an issue with colorism since at least the start of the 3D movies, where Flora's model commonly appeared to be the same skin tone as the other girls. But just because the movies and Nick era seasons did it doesn't mean it's okay. And the fact that this would be such an easy thing to fix with a simple palette alteration makes it all the more infuriating. Especially considering the comics, which use the exact same art style, do have Flora and Aisha's correct skin tones. Honestly though, I think what frustrates me even more is the initial reaction to the colorism of World of Winx. Now, it's been a minute since 2016, and the results I found online were far from conclusive, so correct me if I'm wrong. But from what I've gathered through talking with other fans who were in fandom spaces at the time, a lot of people were dismissing or outright denying the whitewashing in the first place. There were plenty of excuses like it just being a color palette or just being a lighting issue being spouted out regularly. Of course, times have changed and we've generally become much more attuned to issues like this in media, and the whitewashing of the show is thankfully called out much more regularly, but I have a sneaking suspicion that the reason the whitewashing was excused for so long initially was because World of Winx had become something of a golden child among the fandom when it came out. Like I said, after season 7's
Winx Club, we'll ferry you
stuff, getting something that was a little more up to speed with the vibes of the earlier seasons was a godsend in and of itself. And a lot of people were hesitant to hear bad things about their savior of the franchise. The next large aspect of World of Winx's production is its animation. Just like with seasons 5 through 8, the show uses a style of animation called puppet rig or rigging. Also, please stop calling it Flash animation. Adobe Flash isn't even used to make it half the time, and it's just a cheap way to lump together all the good and bad rigged animation when it's a perfectly viable method of animation. And you know, this isn't exactly anything new. The franchise has been experimenting with rigging as early as even the first season. Yeah, I'm like 90% sure the Magic Winx transformations are rigged. You can kinda tell because Aisha's transformation in season 2 has a noticeably different style of animation compared to all the other Winx. But anyway, the newer animation of the later seasons tends to receive a lot of criticism for feeling cheap, choppy, and looking like something that requires an exorcism whenever the writers decide to grace us with dancing. But that doesn't mean you can't have good puppet rig animation with Winx. Some of my favorite cartoons of all time have been made with puppet rig animation. Star vs. the Forces of Evil, The Ghost and Molly McGee, Tangled the series, The Amazing World of Gumball, Friendship is Magic, the list goes on. The puppet animation in this show is just not good at all. I bring all this up because the animation in World of Winx is actually much better than it is in the show. Seriously, all the basic animation techniques that are completely missing in the original show are just magically present in World of Winx. And it all adds up to animation that looks good. Like it's a bloody miracle over here. I have a few more things to say about puppet rig animation, but I'll save that for when I talk about the later seasons of the original show. The point is that World of Winx went through quite a few changes to separate itself from Winx Club, and now that we've seen how it did so production-wise, we can go ahead and see how it does so structurally. Starting with the show's first episode, The Talent Thief, we get a surprisingly engaging opening to the series. Right off the bat, we catch the Winx in the middle of a stakeout, with half of them taking watch at the actual scene of the crime while the other half provides backup on the sidelines. The vibes here end up feeling very reminiscent of other spy-fi shows like Kim Possible or Totally Spies. Or at least, so I've heard, since I've never watched either of those shows. The tension starts to pick up when the Winx finally catch sight of the suspect they're looking for, and we get a short little chase scene that highlights the improved animation I mentioned earlier. Seriously, do y'all see how much better this all looks? Seasons 5 through 7 could never. Though I mean, maybe season 8 could since it's post-World of Winx. Anyway, through some good old magical shenanigans, the Winx lose sight of their target. But they can't stick around for long since they're suddenly called up for their reality TV show, WOW. What I really like about this sequence is how it takes a very deliberate style of exposition and executes it decently well. It doesn't have the same problem that some of the later seasons have, where it's clear that they didn't know what the hell they were doing and just made the Winx spend a bunch of time bumbling around aimlessly. Here, the pacing and tone are consistent throughout, with light bits of levity to help characterize the Winx and sprinkle in some exposition.
Last seen performing at the Fruity Music Bar. Hasn't been seen in 24 hours.
And we've already dismissed my theory of alien abduction, right?
Nothing about it is amazing, but it does what it needs to do and does it well. The rest of the episode spends the majority of its runtime introducing us to the two main plots of the season: the WoW reality TV show and the search for the missing persons, or kidnapped talents as the show calls it. Starting with the WoW show, the whole premise is that the Winx are on this reality television program with a mission to find talents from all over the world. How did they get onto this reality TV show? No clue. Why does it go by the same acronym of the show? Your guess is as good as mine. What's the purpose of them being on this reality TV show? Well, I can actually answer that one, sort of. It's basically so that they can have a conspicuous way to find and protect any potential targets of the talent thief. But I still have no idea how they made the correlation between kidnapped talents in this reality show, since anyone not on the show should theoretically also be targeted. Speaking of the talent thief, that's where the bulk of the show's second plot point stems from. The Winx are constantly on the lookout for clues to figure out who's been initiating all of these kidnappings of targeted individuals in the past few weeks. How did the Winx learn about this talent thief? No idea. Why are they the only magical beings on Earth that are aware of all this? Your guess is as good as mine. Why can they use magic but not transform until they get Dreamix even though they are fairies? Well, you get the idea. Look, I'll be getting into the show's issues with exposition and relying too much on context from the original show to sustain itself. But in terms of information necessary for understanding the main plots, well, like I said, it isn't even close to 10 out of 10 writing, but it knows what it's trying to do and does it pretty well. Halfway through the episode, we get introduced to Annabelle, a waitress at a cupcake shop who has a wonderful singing voice. From then on, we get introduced to the sequence of events that typically unfold leading up to the talents being kidnapped. The Winx find new talent and help them make their dreams come true, which in this case involves handling Annabelle's work at the cupcake shop and giving her a place to perform in front of a crowd. Also, hello, Fruity Music Bar reference. However, just when she is about to have her dreams come to light, she ends up disappearing without a trace, and the episode ends with a brief glimpse of what truly happened to her. Oh, and there's also this subplot about this other girl from the shop who was jealous of Annabelle because she'd been rejected on WoW a year ago, and so she retaliates by shutting off the lights? Okay then. Wait, but like, how long has this show been running exactly? Were the Winx on the show last year? And if so, how come they didn't recognize her? And why was this girl's idea of revenge just shutting off the fucking lights? I have so many questions, y'all. Moving on to the second episode, we pick up right where we left off, with Annabelle still trapped in this shadowy realm we saw before. Through a twist of fate, Bloom actually finds a way into this shadowy realm as well, and manages to meet up with Annabelle. But before long, they end up being separated, and Bloom eventually finds herself back in the Winx loft, leaving her, and by extension the audience, with more questions than answers. Okay, Aisha says that Bloom was just having a nightmare, but I feel like this is supposed to be interpreted as Bloom actually having seen the real Annabelle, since the same thing happens later on where she falls asleep and finds Annabelle again while she dreams. But the thing is, when that happens later on, the Winx are shown to be using some type of magic sand that seems to get left behind by whoever is kidnapping the talents. So how is Bloom able to do so here without that sand? Phew, one thing at a time, I guess. The rest of the episode follows the Winx as they ditch their WoW show duties so they can look for clues as to where Annabelle is. It's also here that we get introduced to Evans and Gomez, two detectives who have also been looking into Annabelle's disappearance and are suspicious of the Winx since they were the ones who last saw her. Eventually, both the Winx and the detectives find a lead on Annabelle and head to the Fruity Music Bar to investigate. The Winx get there first and enter the dressing room that Annabelle used the day of her performance, eventually finding the second earring that Annabelle had been missing during the dream sequence thanks to Stella's deductive reasoning. They also find some of that dream dust I mentioned earlier. But before they can actually look into it, or get caught by the detectives for that matter, they end up being pushed into a magic portal and earning a new power, Dreamix. Again, I really want to talk about how flawed this setup is, but I'm gonna save that for a later part of the video. After the end of the transformation sequence, the Winx find themselves in the mysterious forest Bloom transported to in her dreams. After a few moments of searching, they manage to find Annabelle, but in their haste to rescue her from this strange dimension, wind up running into some shadow creatures that they have to fend off. Once they reach the portal that teleported them there earlier, they find that Annabelle can't go through it. Even when they try using some of the sand on her, it ends up causing some sort of backlash that suddenly makes Annabelle disappear while the rest of the Winx are sent back to the portal. ending the episode with them no closer to completing their rescue mission. Once these first 2 episodes are out of the way, for the rest of the series, you can make a pretty clean distinction between the reality show plotlines and the Talent Thief plotlines. So I figured that now is as good of a time as ever to properly talk about them both. Just like I said earlier, what you see with the WoW TV show is what you get. The Winx finding talents from all over and getting into wacky hijinks as a result. It is worth noting that once they get their Dreamix power, they gain the ability to find talents that are actually being targeted by the Talent Thief. And so things start to make a lot more sense in regards to how the Winx and the Thief keep finding the same people. All in all, I'd say that the WoW subplot is very enjoyable. The talents that we get introduced to throughout the series are all fun characters, and I especially like the dynamics they bring with the Winx member they form the closest relationship with. I'll be getting into how this factors into the Winx's characters in the next section, but I really love each of the Winx having a specific person that they bond with, helping them overcome the hurdles keeping them from making their dreams a reality. In the original show, they definitely tried to give each of the Winx something to do every season, especially in the later ones where Bloom tended to get a lot less focus, but these attempts usually ended up feeling lopsided at best, with one half of the group getting significantly more focus than the other half. Structurally, I think World of Winx's approach to character focus works a lot better, and leads to a much more even share overall. Hell, Bloom ultimately doesn't bond with any of the talent scouts besides Annabelle, and yet she still gets a fair share of focus since she becomes the primary person contributing to the main plot after she gets fired from WoW. Though I will admit that the events leading up to that felt a bit contrived. I mean, Ace specifically puts together this surprise performance to humiliate the Winx, and every other Winx member performs exactly as expected besides Bloom, who suddenly gets a wonderful singing voice even though that's literally Musa's whole deal. I don't know, it seemed like a bit of an odd setup to put Bloom in a position to get fired in the first place. It was a really good song though, I can't lie, I cannot. Moving on to the main plot with the Talent Thief, while I don't think that it's quite as strong as the WoW subplot, it's still pretty good overall. Things start out pretty slow here as the Winx are mostly just using the Talent Thief's targets to try and gather some more info about what they're really looking for. Their first big breakthrough comes in the form of a mysterious watch that a monster named Crocodile Man was carrying when he attacked Naoki. Also, I'm sorry, but Crocodile Man? That's his name? It's so bad. It feels like a placeholder name. Like, it literally took me all of 5 seconds to come up with something else. The Viridescent Draconis. I mean, come on. At least put in a little more effort than fucking Crocodile Man. Anyway, they eventually end up losing the watch when the Crocodile Man comes back for it. But they secretly put a tracking device on it so they could see where the crocodile went with it. Eventually, they all regroup and confirm that the Crocodile Man was transported to the World of Dreams. Things continue to escalate as Bloom searches Annabelle's apartment to find another one of those magic watches before having another run-in with a mystery man from the first episode, eventually being investigated by the 2 detectives from earlier where we learn that they got to the watch before the Winx did. She and Roxy eventually manage to get it back though, only to find that it's broken and doesn't even work. It's here that we get a proper introduction to the mystery man, who is actually named Jim. This Jim character claims to be the owner of the watch. And when Bloom and Roxy naturally call bullshit on that, he explains that he is actually a traitor to the Queen from the World of Dreams and held onto his watch after he was banished from there. The watch ended up getting lost and eventually broken after Annabelle's kidnapping. But Jim claims that he knows someone who can fix it, the watchmaker. It takes some convincing, but Bloom eventually agrees to go with Jim so that they can get the watch fixed and make their way back to the World of Dreams. Up to this point, I don't really have a lot to add. The show handles the whole mystery behind the World of Dreams really well, and gives us just enough exposition to help gradually piece things together while still keeping some things secret. The progression also feels pretty natural and really works in the show's favor. Starting out with the Winx merely reacting to the kidnappings going on around them, and slowly moving towards them taking a more proactive role once they start gathering more and more clues. In a way, it kind of reminds me of what Season 6 was trying to do in its first half, where the Winx have to figure out all these secrets about the Legendarium. Thankfully, it's a lot better executed here though. Starting with episode 11, the 2 main plot points sort of start to merge together. While Bloom and Jim are off trying to find the Watchmaker, the other Winx are drawn to a talent that is not only located very close to where Bloom and Jim currently are, but also becomes essential to helping the Winx save the day. Silka over here seems to have a real passion for skiing, and is even participating in a whole ass competition when the Winx find her. However, it doesn't take long for the Winx, especially Aisha, to realize that she doesn't really have any actual talent in skiing. And seeing as how the competition that she's participating in doesn't take kindly to novices, that's a bit of a problem. Aisha basically tells Silka that trying to go through with a stunt like this at her level is going to be a one-way ticket to a long stay at the hospital at best. Okay, she says this in a nice way, but that's basically what she means. For some reason, Silka's inexperience doesn't stop the Queen from trying to go after her, so the Winx still have to rush to save her from the shadow creatures. And at the end of it all, Silka ultimately decides not to go through with the competition. While the other Winx are busy trying to figure out why Silka was a potential target to begin with, Bloom and Jim finally reach the Watchmaker, only for him to say tough shit and slam the door on them. Though we do learn from Jim that he apparently has an apprentice. It isn't long before they get ambushed by some zombie pirates, and another mystery man. Oh, and I forgot to mention that these zombie pirates showed up in the last episode and the other 5 Winx got to fight them. So it didn't just come out of nowhere like some of the other stuff, trust me. There's a fight scene between Bloom, Jim, the pirates, and Mystery Man, but it mostly just amounts to a pirate trying to grab them and both of them jumping out of the way. Repeat ad nauseum until Bloom transforms, saves Evans and Gomez, and then eventually gets captured. The other Winx eventually make their way over to the Watchmaker's house after getting a distress call from Bloom, but they learn from the 2 detectives that they're too late, and Bloom has already been captured. Fortunately, the broken watch was left behind, and since Silka is actually the Watchmaker's niece, he'll probably be much more open to hearing them out now. See? I told you she was going to be important, I told ya! Some shenanigans ensue as the Winx, detectives, and Silka try to navigate the trap set up around the place, but they manage to reach the Watchmaker and ask him to fix the watch, only to be met with disappointment when he tells them it's not possible. Silka, however, refuses to believe that, and through her own cunning, actually manages to get the watch fixed and allows a portal to be opened for the Winx.
Maybe the only way to fix it is backwards. Just because something is different from what we know doesn't mean that it's wrong. Actually, perhaps that's precisely the way you really get to know it.
The Winx make their way into the portal, promising to rescue Bloom and the kidnapped talents as the episode ends, leading to the season finale for the show, aka the franchise's literal best season finale since at least season 5. This is such a fun episode for a lot of different reasons. For one thing, it starts out with an interesting premise in which all but one of the Winx are present, and the others are trying to rescue her. Don't get me wrong, this isn't exactly innovative or anything. Seasons 2, 4, and 5 all had similar plotlines in their finales, but none of them were really played completely straight besides arguably season 2. And even then, the Winx never really had a full one-on-one with Darkar, and the fight is over before it even starts. Likewise, season 4's finale was sort of bogged down by all the holier-than-thou morality debates that plagued that season's second half, and season 5 had most of the Winx off on their own mission, with Bloom being the only person to really face off against Tritanus. Here, literally everyone except for Bloom is tasked with not only finding the Queen in this backwards maze of a realm, but also getting to battle the Queen and all of her allies from previous episodes. The stakes feel pretty engaged in a way that they never have before, leading to some pretty good fight scenes and even a nice display of the Winx's powers. But of course, Bloom eventually gets to join the fight after Jim helps her get free, and the Winx finally get to turn the tides and free all the kidnapped talents. As the Queen goes into hiding, Jim chooses to stay in the World of Dreams to track her down, and so the Winx, along with all of the talents, head back to Earth. The episode ends as everyone is brought back just in time for the finals of WoW, and everything seems to be right in the world once again. But actually no, because then we get this cliffhanger that makes Jim look like a stereotypical mustache-twirling villain, with his personality taking a 180 to brooding dark menace, and monologuing about how Neverland will be his, and having his evil laugh moment, and ugh.
Part of me feels so bad, but ooh, not that bad.
Look, this cliffhanger is tolerable on its own, but with the context of season 2, yikes. It was really just a sign of things to come, wasn't it? But anyway, season 1. Really fun and engaging season with both of its plot points being really fun and engaging. Barring the very sloppily executed cliffhanger, it provided a pretty good setup going into the next season. Now let's go ahead and move on to the characters. Probably one of the biggest ways that World of Winx differs from the original show is how it handles its characters, specifically the Winx themselves. You see, in the original show, all of the Winx were treated as dynamic characters. In other words, they were treated as characters that would change and develop throughout the narrative. And although the actual character focus tends to vary depending on which season we're talking about, generally each of the Winx have some sort of arc that reaches a conclusion near the end of the story. In contrast, World of Winx treats all the main girls as static characters, ones that do still have certain personality traits and flaws that impact the story, but ultimately don't change much as characters from start to finish. And in a way, I feel like that works just as well, honestly. Even if they aren't really going through much in the name of character development, each of the Winx still all have really fun and unique personalities among one another. And as I mentioned earlier, I really love that the bulk of their character progression comes from them forming a connection with one of the endangered talents and inspiring them to work through their flaws and eventually make their dreams come true. See, Sonic Twitter, I don't hate static characters, I just like them to actually be, interesting characters. Okay, that was kinda mean, I'm sorry. Y'all are free to have whatever opinions you want on Sonic and his characterization, just don't expect me not to take pot shots when you make your opinions as obnoxious as possible. I'm specifically talking about Sonic Twitter here. Out of everyone here, Bloom is probably the one who got the biggest glow up. In the original show, her personality tended to be a bit lacking in general, but it would also depend a lot on the season, plot point, and even the dub. For example, 4Kids Bloom was given a much more interesting personality compared to the original, at least Cinnaloom dub, with a lot of added quirks like being relatably awkward or having a snarky side and a pretty fiery temper. But 4Kids dialed back on a lot of that in Season 3, probably because their near bankruptcy kept them from making many changes to the original script. There's also Season 5 Bloom, who is like literally 100 times better whenever she's not dealing with the Sky-related subplot. My point is that the original show has always struggled a bit with properly characterizing Bloom, and World of Winx really put in the work to make her a consistently fun character. A lot of her positive traits in the original show are kept in. She's still a very determined person and carries a lot of love for those around her, but she also has extra facets of her character such as being impulsive or being somewhat of a hothead at times. There are even things like her literally breaking the fourth wall to talk to the audience in an overly jovial tone, which I absolutely love.
I could tell them about the talent thief and the secret mission, but that would put them in danger. It wouldn't be a good idea.
My favorite part about World of Winx Bloom is how her flaws are treated as actual flaws. A lot of the fandom tends to struggle with striking a decent balance between having Bloom's flaws be either harmless little quirks that never have any negative consequences on anything, or an easy way to demonize her instead of actually treating her as a multi-dimensional character. And the show strikes that line perfectly in my opinion. When Bloom starts getting snappy with Ace because of his insufferable attitude, for instance, it still ends up having a negative impact on the story, but the show doesn't make a super big deal out of it either. It's just a flaw that has natural consequences, and I really do appreciate that. Stella has been relatively unchanged from her original character, except for the fact that they've largely stripped back on her more irritating character flaws in the older and especially newer seasons. I think her usual routine of being the comic relief of the group is pretty well done overall, and at no point throughout the show did she ever really annoy me, which, like I said, is a massive improvement over some of her moments in the original.
One day in class, my teacher asked me, "Stella, can you please point to America on the map?" And so I pointed. "Here it is." "Class, who discovered America?" he said. And I said, "Duh, I just did."
Musa is definitely interesting here. Another issue I have with the Winx fandom in terms of characterization is that they have a tendency to push more masculine traits onto Musa than are really necessary, believing that she's supposed to fit into the tomboy archetype. But in my opinion, she's never really given off major tomboy vibes in the original. Yeah, she, Tekna, and Aisha were a bit less overtly feminine compared to the other Winx, and to be fair, 4Kids really did lean towards interpreting her as a tomboy, which might be where it came from.
Yo, if you plan to blow up more stuff, let us know ahead so we can bounce.
But to me, she's never fully come across as someone who teetered more towards masculinity than femininity. Though, to be honest, I could get into a whole rant about my problems with the whole tomboy archetype in general, but that's a whole other video. Just like with Bloom, I feel that World of Winx does a good job at striking the necessary balance with Musa's personality. While she is still enthusiastic, irrepressible, and can be snarky at times, she also has other things like her vast and nuanced knowledge and love for music, which is constantly showcased in the use of her powers and even her subplot with Madeline, where she encourages her to follow her passions instead of her parents' expectations. It's a bit of a similar case with Flora. Now, OG Flora wasn't great in my opinion, and that's mainly because she doesn't really have a substantial personality past the first season. It's not that they don't try to do things with her. Season 2 and especially 5 are good examples of pretty heavy character arcs for her in particular, but they frustratingly never actually delve into exploring her character even nearly as much as they should. While I still think there was a lot more they could have done with her, I like the direction they took focusing on her connection with all the different aspects of nature. In a way, it helps her feel like a part of something much bigger, like we've only just begun to understand how she truly connects to the world around her. Definitely would have been a fun thing to explore in the second season.
You did this for what?
Why not?
Why?
Why not?
Why though?
Also, I love the joke they have about Flora constantly making really bad tasting tea. I don't know why, it's just really funny to me.
My special focus blend. It's good, right?
I don't have very much to say about Tekna. She's more or less similar to how she was in the original show. It's just that they actually give her opportunities to show off her personality. That scene where she's kicking Aisha's ass in a video game is iconic for a reason. That's all I'm gonna say. And speaking of Aisha, I really do not like what they did with her in World of Winx. To put it plainly, they've basically turned my girl into an angry black woman stereotype. Now, I do want to clarify what I mean by that. The problem with stereotypes like the angry black woman isn't that characters labeled under them might resemble certain aspects of said stereotypes. The problem is that those aspects of the character become their only personality. I don't have a problem with Aisha being short-tempered and hot-headed. Hell, she could be like that in the original show as well. My problem is that her entire personality in World of Winx typically involves her being impulsive and snappy and angry with very little provocation, either for the sake of comedy or just as her general personality. That scene where she just straight up pushed Lorelai out of the way when they were all literally being recorded really rubbed me the wrong way, even if it was admittedly a bit amusing. I also don't like how they put such a heavy emphasis on her being into sports. Again, this is more so an issue I have with both the show and the fandom, where they take the Winx members who are considerably less feminine than the others and push more masculine traits onto them. Like, I get that in the original, Aisha was very athletic and took care of herself, but she was never really into sports that much from what I could gather. And of course, Roxy also does make an appearance in this show. I like that they found a way to incorporate her into the spin-off, and she even has some cool powers like controlling Arthur in this show, for some reason. But she isn't utilized nearly as much as I wish she was, and she doesn't even get a fairy form of her own. This is also another case of the show just picking and choosing which fairies it wants to be relevant to the plot instead of introducing them naturally, but again, for another section. I think it would have been really interesting if they had like an episode where she was used as bait for the talent thief and then all of the Winx ambushed whoever showed up. But other than that, not much to say about her. Moving on from the main Winx, let's talk about some of the WoW characters, shall we? Starting with the main man himself, Ace is, I think, a very controversial character in the Winx fandom. People either seem to love him for his exaggerated personality or hate him for his exaggerated personality. For me though, I would say I enjoy him for the most part. He serves his purpose of being the extravagant, over-the-top game show host, and even when he's being obnoxious, he usually gets some sort of comeuppance for it. Even if getting brainwashed for an entire afternoon is probably pushing it when it comes to adequate retribution. The only time I was kind of iffy about Ace is when we saw him snooping through the Winx loft in the finale. Like, did that man break in? I mean, maybe he's the one who gave them the loft or something, but that still seems like a massive invasion of privacy. Am I missing something here? Should I really just ask Am I the asshole about whether Ace would be in the wrong in this situation? Lorelai is another contentious figure in the Winx fandom, though it tends to skew much more negatively in her case, and I totally understand why. Her entire character involves being as unbearable as possible, and not even in an especially original way. It also doesn't help that she also takes some unnecessary pot shots at Bloom, though she did kinda eat, I can't lie.
Oh, you're here too. Sorry, Bloom, but you're just not important.
I mean, regardless of your feelings about Bloom, you have to admit she ate her up. I'm sorry. While she does have her bad moments, I would say I'm fine with Lorelai for the most part. She can make for some pretty entertaining scenes, and I also like how they use her gigantic ego and general incompetence to influence the plot. Like when the Winx encourage her to be the star of a WoW episode so they can go do their own thing. Or when she tries to expose the Winx as fairies, but because she's an absolute dumbass who doesn't think to try and record any evidence, she ends up making a complete fool of herself.
The Winx are fairies!
Thanks, Lorelai. If you wanted to pay us a compliment, you didn't have to go so far.
Evans and Gomez are fine as characters. They sort of follow a common cliche of the strict and serious cop juxtaposed with the goofy and infatuated sidekick, and it's executed about as well as you can imagine. I don't have much more to add besides just mentioning that Gomez tends to be really irritating whenever he's fawning over Evans. This is less the problem with the character and more just me being sick of characters in media who have a routine of being all lovey-dovey around a character of the opposite sex. Whether it's a girl doing it to a guy or a guy doing it to a girl, this trope just always gets old extraordinarily fast, and I don't know why writers constantly rely on it. I also don't have much to say about any of the Talons. They're all fine characters who serve their purpose well and have some fun dynamics with the Winx. Honestly, just watch the show yourself if you really want to see their personalities outside of the small details I give in this review. To close it out, we have the characters from the World of Dreams. Jim is definitely pretty cool as a character. Like we've already gone over, he has the goal of overthrowing the Queen's rule and rescuing the kidnapped Talons. When he was first caught opposing the Queen, it was said in the finale that she showed mercy and banished him to Earth, which is why he stole a watch from one of her henchmen and kept coming back. As we all know, that watch eventually gets broken and he ends up forming an alliance with Bloom as they work to repair it and defeat the Queen. But overall, I really enjoy how he's executed in the overarching narrative. His entire backstory with the World of Dreams adds a lot of texture to the show's world building, along with painting a better picture of the Queen's characterization. And even before all that, I would say he does an overall okay job with being an antagonistic figure who eventually sides with the heroes. Not great, but at least serviceable. Once we actually get to see him interacting with other characters, especially Bloom, his personality and their dynamic are what can only be described as Skloom done right. Oh my gosh, now I feel bad. Okay, no hate meant to any Skloom shippers, I promise. Instead of a bland love interest paired with a decently interesting character that also ends up getting bogged down by aforementioned love interest, Jim's steadfast and tempered nature are a perfect contrast to Bloom's own personality. And then you have all those scenes where they're saving each other and looking out for one another. Okay, I admit it, I ship these two together. Look, I don't make the rules. Y'all can expect a Bloom fanfic posted to AO3 in the year of 2053. Mark my words. Okay, their ship name kinda sucks, but there's another one I've seen that...
Don't let your kids watch it!
It's too bad that he was stripped of all personality to become a generic villain for the sake of a cliffhanger, but again, that's mostly a Season 2 problem, not a Season 1 problem. Moving on to the main villain of the season, the Queen is mostly just alluded to in the first few episodes of Season 1, only ever being called the Talent Thief. And even then, they don't really know that she's the true Talent Thief. She makes her first proper appearance in episode 9, but it isn't until episode 13 where we start to delve into her character and motivations. It's here we learn that the Queen essentially steals all the talents she collects and uses them as her own, which is why she gets powers like Yu's fighting skills, Annabelle's voice because she can't speak without it, and even Bloom's firepower for a brief moment. She explains that she uses these stolen talents and dreams as payment for the dream that was taken from her. But we don't really have much more than that to go off of because he spends the rest of the episode fighting the Winx and then retreating when the Winx take back all the stolen talents. By the end of season 1, it's clear that we still don't know much about the Queen and why she's doing all this to begin with. So she definitely serves as a nice little dangling plot thread that leaves a lot of mystery and intrigue to be figured out come the second season. Overall, I find her to be a very interesting character that had a lot of potential to be fleshed out in future seasons. And flesh her out. They did. They fleshed her out. I can say that much. I believe those were all the major characters this season, so now we can end off with the minor characters in the lightning round. Margaret, pretty typical negative Nancy archetype, but her and her dog Puff tend to be fairly entertaining. Cliff is so very totally gay, and I am living for his flamboyant personality. Crocodile Man! I'm still not over that name, it's so bad. Zombie Pirates. I'm sure someone, somewhere, will find a way to make them feel dirtier than they really are, but they're fine. Mystery Man, whose name we learned is Smee. His voice is annoying as all hell, but he's got some cool powers, I guess. Shaman. Alright, cutting the jokes for just a second, there is quite a bit that I want to say about this character, and by extension Tiger Lily in the second season. But I'll save that for the next video when we actually start getting into the Peter Pan stuff and some of its unfortunate implications. Right now, I'll just say that as a character, he does what he needs to do and has some cool powers at his disposal. I think that should be everyone. Most of the other characters are either only relevant in the second season, or are so insignificant that I didn't think they were worth a mention. Ultimately, we have a pretty well-rounded cast of characters with no major issues. Unfortunately, the next section has issues, and we're really going to be starting to get into those. The issues with World of Winx, if that wasn't obvious. I'm such a great narrator, you guys. So, just like I said in the beginning of this video, I think World of Winx is structurally a lot more competent than the original show. Don't get me wrong, I still think the original show is better when it comes to things like characters and world building, but it just feels like World of Winx actually knows what it's doing a lot more than Winx Club does. In the first season, I must emphasize that this only applies to the first season. I genuinely don't know what was happening in the second season. I mean, it seems like a lot of the Winx fandom generally does agree with me. The common consensus is that World of Winx is better than at least seasons 5 through 8 of the original. Though I think where opinions differ between me and the fandom is how World of Winx is better. A lot of people might say that World of Winx is more like the first 4 seasons, because it's darker and edgier and has more mature storylines. But to be completely honest, I'm kinda just wondering where that came from. I mean, maybe it's just because World of Winx came out right after season 7, a season that was indeed overly childish and not very good. But to me, World of Winx isn't really a show that's trying to be dark or trying to be mature. I mean, I know the entire plot is about this evil queen who's stealing talent all over the world, but these things are never really played out as even remotely frightening to the audience. And in general, World of Winx strikes me as a show that's more so trying to just have fun with itself than trying to pass down any mature themes or whatever. And honestly, I feel like that's why it works so well. Though, to be fair, that's pretty much my thoughts on the best moments of the original show. Now, keep in mind that this is a very abridged version of my overall thoughts on Winx as a franchise, and I plan to go way more in-depth when I start my actual retrospective. But in my opinion, the reason why the bad seasons and bad moments of Winx Club are, well, bad, are because they far too often go against the franchise's bread and butter and try to be something that they're not. Either the show is trying to be this unnecessarily childish thing without any of the fun and style that it's typically known for, or it's trying to bite off way more than it can chew with plotlines that aren't very well thought out and don't mesh with the show's general vibe because of it. I guess what I'm trying to say with all of this is, World of Winx isn't better to me because it's more like the first 4 seasons. I think World of Winx is structurally more competent because it embraces the best aspects of Winx Club while either diminishing or outright removing the worst aspects. It generally knows what it wants to be and commits to that from start to finish. It knows that it wants to be a fun show about fairies going undercover to fight evil witches, or queens, and tells a very enjoyable, if fairly simple, mystery story as a result. Most importantly, it never adds unnecessary components to the show that end up tainting its already good story, something that definitely can't be said of the original show. Now, of course, there are a lot of examples I could use as to why World of Winx does what Winx Club doesn't, but the main one I want to focus on is the prevalence of the specialists, since it's kind of relevant to both shows, just in different ways. In Winx Club, the specialists are normally used for never-ending relationship drama that has absolutely no bearing on the original plot. Now, I'm not saying that Winx Club isn't allowed to have romantic arcs just because it's not strictly a romance, but far too often, the romance in this show tends to take priority in times when it absolutely shouldn't, worsening the show's overall quality. Season 4 is a prime example of this, you can probably guess why. But for World of Winx, oh, praise the Lord, it is specialist-free, hallelujah. Oh my gosh, I feel like I'm being mean again. Okay, if you guys like the specialist, that's fine. I just don't. All of the guys from the original are nowhere to be found. And besides my headcanon romantic tension between Bloom and Jim, there's actually no real romance arcs with any of the Winx. And the show is honestly truly better for it. I don't know which intern on set came up to Rainbow SRL and told them that drawn-out romance arcs in a 13-episode season would probably hurt the show much more than it would help it. But I hope that person got a damn good raise, because it is honestly astonishing how significantly World of Winx improved in quality by virtue of the specialists not being there. With all that being said, World of Winx's structure is also not without its problems. Namely, the lack of exposition in areas where exposition is all but essential. To circle back to the specialist example I used earlier, there's no real explanation of why the specialists are completely absent in this show, which makes their lack of relevance feel especially pungent. Ooh, that was a good one. Pungent. On its own, this isn't the worst thing in the world, and can probably be explained with this being a spin-off that functions in a different continuity than the original, but with the context of all the other examples of this lack of exposition, it becomes emblematic of a much larger issue. There are so many questions about this show that simply go unanswered. Where did the Winx come from, and how did they eventually move to Earth? How did they find out about the Talent Thief? And on that note, how did they learn about and get on the WoW TV show? How does magic even work in this world? Like, why can't the Winx transform until they earn Dreamix? And how did they even earn Dreamix in the first place? Why is Roxy here? Is she still an Earth Fairy, or was that changed to have her be the same whatever category of fairy the other girls are? I could go on forever, but I'm sure you all get the point. There are just way too many questions that are either left up to interpretation or require the context of the original show to understand. Like why we're focusing on these 6 girls in particular as opposed to literally any other group of fairies. And even then, the explanation only ever goes as far as, we focused on the 6 Winx in the original and so we're doing the same thing here. We still don't know why the Winx in particular are tasked with taking down the Talent Thief. I'm sorry, y'all. I need some water. I need some water. Like, writers, you guys do realize you still have to explain these things, right? A spin-off isn't just your get-out-of-jail-free card when it comes to exposition. Certain things need to be reintroduced to the new audience that is no doubt watching this show without any context from the original. I shouldn't need to have watched Winx Club to have an idea of what is even going on. Hell, I've probably watched the original more times than I can count and still don't have the answers to some of the questions above, so at the end of the day, the biggest issue with World of Winx in its first season is that it doesn't explain enough about the rules of its universe. And sure, anyone who's watched Winx Club already can probably put 2 and 2 together in some ways, but that shouldn't be necessary in a spin-off for one, and the audience should not ever be tasked with doing the work for the writers for 2. I'd say 2nd or 3rd time's the charm, and that season 2 or 3 would have been the perfect opportunity to fix these issues. But not only was season 2 an absolute train wreck, but season 3 was cancelled before we got to see what that would have looked like. And honestly, Season 2 made the problem like 10 times worse, so I'm not exactly confident that Season 3 would have done much better. Okay, tangent over. To circle back to Season 1, the structure is a bit of a mixed bag in particular. Even with the context of the original show to consider, there are far too many plot holes that the show just expects you to ignore. So when we take that context out of the picture, the show turns into a very confusing charade very quickly. But if you can ignore all of that, and trust me, it's difficult, the show generally shows a lot of competence. It knows what it's trying to do and doesn't waste its time on pointless subplots if it can't afford it. It doesn't have a tone that's overly cheesy, nor does it have one that's painfully self-serious. It just has a good balance of everything. You just really have to turn off your brain at some points. Or you might end up thinking too hard about why the talent thief never goes after the chef dude when she targets literally every other talent the Winx find. Jesus Christ! Since there's no other place to mention this in the review, I'll also use this section to discuss my thoughts on the season's main transformation, Dreamix. This will be in a similar format to my transformation ranking, where I'm judging based on concept, execution, obtainment, aesthetics, and spells. Dreamix doesn't really have a concept besides being the primary transformation for the season. And while that isn't necessarily a bad thing, with this being the first transformation we get in this new spin-off, the execution could definitely use some work. The way it's earned is similarly lacking. In the first episode, all the Winx have this vision of them getting the transformation for some reason that is, once again, never properly explained. And then in the second episode, it really just comes to them at a suspiciously convenient time. And that's that. Like, what the hell? How do these girls just get the portal magically opened up for them out of the blue? And how does that correlate to a new transformation? Oh my god, Dreamix is giving me a headache! I'll admit that the ability to predict the victims of the talent thief is pretty cool, and it's also really cute that Stella comes up with the transformation name. You know, after we hear the song with the word Dreamix in it. But there are a few too many plot holes that need to be covered with a pretty thick layer of cement to make this setup work. Fortunately, everything else about Dreamix is serviceable at worst. The designs are pretty good, matching up with the spy fight aspect with these sleek jumpsuits, while also incorporating the fairy motif with the wings and jewelry. The spells are also pretty interesting. Since they don't fall into the typical formula of needing to be categorized by names, the writers have a lot more creative freedom with what they want the Winx to do. There were a lot of creative powers on display, like Musa mimicking the sound of footsteps, Aisha full-on manipulating water, and Stella using her light powers to dispel a tornado made of darkness because she's just that awesome.
Light 1, shadow 0.
Honestly, Dreamix is kinda just World of Winx Season 1 in a nutshell. It relies far too much on the audience's suspension of disbelief to carry its shortcomings and plot holes, but if you can get past those issues, it shows a lot of promise and is decent in its execution. So there you go, that's the first season of World of Winx. I'll be honest, looking back at this one with all the pitfalls of the second season to consider may have tainted some of my thoughts on Season 1 overall. I feel like I was a lot harsher on Season 1 than what it might deserve because I sort of saw the season's flaws as the original warning signs that would eventually become a whole lot worse in the future. I still think this is a decent season on its own. The plot is engaging and entertaining, the characters are nice and do a good job of fleshing out the show's universe, and the really stupid stuff is mostly saved for Season 2 so you can enjoy the season divorced from all of that. But even then, rewatching this season for my review revealed a lot more problems than I remembered. And while I cannot stress enough how big of an opportunity it would have been to fix those things in the second season, they just did the complete opposite of that. Great, wonderful, live, laugh, love, World of Winx. My final ranking for World of Winx is a 7 out of 10. It has a few too many issues with setup and also several questionable writing decisions that stopped me from giving it that 8. But the core experience is still pretty strong, and when the good writing truly shines through, you're pretty much guaranteed for a fun time. Well, that pretty much concludes my little soapbox moment. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Feel free to comment on anything I can improve on or any thoughts you have on the show yourself. As long as you're not rude about it, I'd love to hear what you have to say. And if you are interested in seeing me talk about the second season, make sure to subscribe and click the bell so you know what I'm cooking up. But other than that, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video.